Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 374. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Monday, September the 2nd, from the James Strong studio in Western St. Charles County. Happy Labor Day to all if you're listening today, the day of the broadcast. If not, I hope you had a good, relaxing Labor Day if you were off work. If you had to work, sorry about that. I hope you have a good, relaxing evening or day, whatever. Beautiful day in East Central Missouri. Labor Day weekend is officially, or the unofficial, end of summer, I guess. Actually, the weather's gotten much cooler here. I think it's 73 degrees as I record the podcast. It's supposed to not get up to 80 degrees for the rest of the week, with lows in the 50s at night. Fantastic weather. The air conditioner's off, the window's open, but the sun is out, so the pool will be warm. So when I'm done with this podcast, I'm going to take a dip in the pool and enjoy a nice, relaxing day off. Topic of today's podcast has to do with definitely the most incredible creature to ever walk the face of the earth. The adaptable human being. Yeah, that's us. Okay. Sure. Plants are adaptable. Animals are adaptable. But if you look at how much humans have to adapt because of the change that we encounter and the rate of change, the speed of the rate of change, it's incredible that we even survive. And not only do we survive, but we prosper. And that's in spite of poor governments everywhere. Is there a country that has a good government, really? Some are better than others. I mean, ours is better than most, probably better than all. But I would not say it's good, okay? But we just seem to adapt. Everybody in the world seems to adapt. Even countries that have absolutely horrible governments or even next to no governments, they adapt, they survive, and they get by. And that's what we're going to talk about, give a few examples of how the amazing adaptable human being has really prospered for centuries and centuries and centuries. And today is no exception. Before we get into that, I didn't do a podcast last week because I was going to do one at the end of the week, but I got busy, and actually we had a wedding this weekend. Number 2 son, my last son, who isn't married, got married, and the wedding was out of town, so I've been out of town for a few days, celebrating the wedding day of number 2 son, the last of my boys to get married. So congratulations, Bob and Jessica, on a wonderful wedding this past weekend. Again, the topic of today's podcast, though, is going to be the adaptable human beings. And I myself am going to adapt. I mean, I'm doing a podcast on Monday, and I hope to do one by the end of the week, or at least very, very early next week, because I'm going on an adventure. I'll be climbing White Mountain Peak next week with number 3 son. We're flying out to Las Vegas, and then we're driving to the town of Bishop, California, which is right in between the Sierras and the White Mountains. We'll spend the night in Bishop at 6,000 feet in our attempt to acclimate to the altitude. Then we'll get up the next morning and we will buy our supplies and drive up to the Grandview Campground and camp at 8,000 feet. Spend the day there, spend the night there, then get up in the morning and explore the ancient bristlecone pine forest, which is at a little more than 10,000 feet. We'll spend the day there, then come back to 8,000 feet and sleep, then get up the third morning and climb White Mountain Peak, which is more than 14,000 feet. In fact, it's the second tallest mountain in the contiguous 48 states after Mount Whitney. So it's just a few feet shy of Mount Whitney. Whole lot easier to climb than Whitney, though. It's a up and back in one day trip, a little over 15 miles round trip. So that's going to be next week. So remember, adventure of a lifetime 3 times a week. I think this is my 4th or 5th one. So mission accomplished. So hopefully I'll get another podcast in this week, or at least early next week. And you can be rest assured that I will have a podcast on the White Mountain Peak adventure. Okay, let's get into the topic of today's podcast, the adaptable human being. But again, one more thing I want to talk about before we get into this podcast, because I mentioned that we tend to adapt in spite of government. And we've got an election coming up, and you've got people who say, the Democratic Party candidate, they're the only ones that can save us. And the Republican Party candidate, they're the only ones that can save us. Dear listeners, I don't know who's going to win the election. Nobody does. But whoever does, I guarantee they're not going to save us. You've got to save yourself. You've got to do what you need to do to make it work for you, okay? Case in point, what is the simplest thing that the government could do to save millions upon millions of dollars a year? Tens of millions of dollars a year. Stop minting pennies. Okay? And they can't even do that. In fact, we get into a bigger bind with pennies every single year. It's the dumbest thing that I've ever heard as to why we even mint pennies. There's one guy calls this the perpetual penny paradox. Okay. Now, most pennies that are produced by the U.S. Mint are given out by change. You've bought something, paid with cash, they give you pennies back. But most people don't pay for anything in pennies. In other words, the mint gives them out, people give them out in change, but they're never spent. And they're put in a drawer, they're put in a bottle, they're put Lord knows where, okay? So any transaction that's paid for with cash that has the final digit ending in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 can only be settled with pennies, okay? Now, the replacement pennies, if they're given out and not spent, they have to be replaced the next year with more pennies that will be given out and not spent, and then replaced with more pennies that will be given out and not spent. And we keep minting pennies because no one uses the pennies that we mint, okay? Now, it's a conservative estimate, according to one source, that there's 240 billion pennies just lying around. That's $7.24. Even you can do that math. 724 pennies for every man, woman, and child living here. That's enough to hand 2 pennies to every bewildered human being born since the dawn of man. That's how many are just laying around. Now, to distribute them all, in fact, we have to double back to the beginning and give our first 6 billion ancestors a third, that's a third of American, a penny. Now, these are just a fraction of the several hundreds of billions of pennies that have been issued since 1793. But again, back then, they actually used them, okay? A penny was probably never a big deal, but it was a deal, okay? Pennies are worthless. They're never almost used outside of to buy something. You never pay for anything in pennies because you don't have them in your pocket. Many countries like Canada, they don't even issue pennies anymore. It's been years since they've issued pennies. They just don't. Things don't end. They end in a 0 or a 5 in Canada, okay? They just stopped minting pennies. They stopped. It's rounded up or rounded down, and nobody cares. Now, here's the problem. Just moving pennies around is expensive. Forget about how much it costs to mint them. But there would be an unbelievable amount of pennies that most likely there wouldn't be enough room to hold them if people started to spend them. Moving them from place to place would be time consuming and costly. $100 worth of pennies weighs 55 pounds. And there's 240 billion pennies just laying around. That's tons of pennies. Tons. Now, the government has willfully ignored this nonsensical math problem for decades. In fact, William E. Simon, he was the Treasury Secretary, he begged lawmakers, he said, look, give serious consideration just abandoning the 1 cent as soon as possible. We don't need them. They're worthless. It cost them too much. When was William E. Simon the Treasury Secretary? 48 years ago. And they're still thinking about it. For 50 years, the guy who runs the Treasury says, look, let's get rid of these pennies. But he can't do that, okay? Because he doesn't issue the laws. Now, 25 years ago, Philip Deal, he was then the director of the United States Mint, stated that 2/3 of the pennies produced in the last 30 years had dropped out of circulation. Nobody even knows where they are, okay? Even at a time when 3/4 of American payments were still settled with cash. That was back then. Pennies weren't even being spent back then. Okay, so it wasn't a case that, well, nobody spends pennies now because nobody pays in cash. Back then, people did, and they still weren't spending pennies. Okay? Now, a 2022 federal survey found that Americans paid with cash just 18% of the time. Now, it's impossible to know how many of those transactions might have involved coins, let alone pennies, because the Fed doesn't even try to track this. But one thing we know for sure about America's 1-cent coins, however, is just one of them costs 3 cents to produce. So for every penny the government makes, it costs them 3 cents to make it. And then they have to keep making more because nobody spends them. Now, why in 2024 does our nation spew out pennies like they're going out of style, okay? Some people, government officials, numerologists, economists, scientists, scrap metal industrialists, they all have a different person to blame. But to an uninterested Congress, highly interested lobbyists, I mean, people that are bad at math, I mean, there's no way that we need to have pennies. Nobody knows why, but we keep having them. Now, why don't you let's just stop having pennies? Whether you were a fan of Barack Obama or not, one of the biggest problems I had with President Obama is that he was a big-time finger pointer. Somebody needs to do something, okay? You're the head of the free world. You can do something. President Obama said the penny is a good metaphor for a large problem. He said, but we just can't get rid of these things because Congress has to do that. We need legislation to get rid of the penny. Presidents have given executive orders to do everything from bombing despots to bombing allies to you name it. There's been an executive order for it. Why doesn't a president give an executive order to ban a penny? Okay, so let's point at President Obama, say it's your fault, okay? Well, then why didn't President Trump do it? And why didn't President Biden do it? Why doesn't President Biden do it? He could do it tomorrow if he wanted to. And whoever the next president is, why don't they do it? They don't have to wait for Congress. Just sign an executive order. Or let's say they don't want to. Why doesn't Congress do it? $90 million a year is what this country is costing us to make pennies. How do I know that? Edmund Moy, he's the U.S. Mint's 28th director. He was the director between 2006 and 2011. He said, it costs $90 million a year for me to spend pennies. And you guys need to pass a law forcing me to just change it. So even he begged. Now, there was a guy named Steve Stivers. He was a congressman from Ohio, and he led multiple unsuccessful attempts to revise coinage laws while he was serving in the House from 2011 to 2021. In fact, he had hoped to enjoin the mint to make pennies out of cold-rolled steel or something where it didn't even have to cost as much. In fact, from a very selfish standpoint, he was looking at them to make pennies out of cold-rolled steel that was sold in Ohio. So it was a selfish way, but it never happened because people just never got around to doing it. Well, maybe we should make it stainless steel. Or maybe we shouldn't make it stainless steel. Bottom line is stainless steel is more expensive than what they're doing now. Well, again, they argued over what kind of steel to make the pennies out of to save money. And would it save money or not? Why didn't they just stop making them? I guess it's the lobbyists. I don't know. But that's why I say if government wanted to save this country $90 million a year. In fact, that was the figure quoted back in 2011. So it's got to be more than $90 million a year. Okay. Get rid of the pennies. Canada did it, and they never bat an eye. Not a problem. Okay, yeah, they used to make them out of copper. They don't now. In fact, now they're made out of they're 98% zinc with a copper coating to make sure they kind of look like pennies. And who loves this idea? The zinc industry, the zinc lobby loves it because they keep it getting to sell zinc to the mint. They would lose all kinds of money if they couldn't do that. It's just, and we go on and on and on and on. I mean, do we cut social programs? Well, social programs help people. Are there abuses? Sure there are, but they help people. Do we need to cut the road taxes because nobody wants to pay more gas taxes? Yeah, but you know what? You get gas tax and at least you get roads that don't have potholes in them and tear up your tires. Recently, I had to replace tires on my Jaguar because I hit a pothole and it put a big old knot on the inside of the tire. So I had to spend over $1,000 on tires. Congratulations. Okay. But again, whether you're against road tax or for road tax, everybody agrees that, you know, it makes for the roads better, that are better, and this is something that's spent with it. Pennies, I don't know if anybody says, you know what, we've got to keep the penny because, why? Pennies are necessary. I don't know of one person who believes that. And if you were to cue the lawmakers, they agree, but they won't stop. And dear listeners, that's why I say, you can't rely on government to bail you out because they can't even stop spending over $90 million a year on pennies that nobody wants. They can't even do that. So if you're going to help if you want help, you need to help yourself. Don't rely on the government. But we're kind of doing that. In fact, people do that all over the world, and they always have. The adaptable human being, I like to call them. Plants adapt, okay? We have climate change. The world is getting warmer, so plants are adapting. Plants that used to just be in the south are now moving north because they can. Plants that were needed more water, they're adapting by having deeper roots, okay? Tougher skins, whatever. Plants adapt, animals adapt, and people adapt too. In fact, everything adapts or it dies, okay? But human beings are probably the most adaptable of all. You and I and our friends, our neighbors, we tend to be adaptable because things change for us much quicker than they change for anything else, and it has to do with technology. It was a British psychologist, and pardon me, but I can't think of his name. He's in his 80s, but he mentioned, hey, look, we've got a big problem with rise in mental illness and people having anxiety problems in the Western world. And he says the reason that is because at the rate that technology is changing, it's surpassed man's ability to adapt. So using numbers, and I'm making these numbers up, but you'll understand what I'm talking about here. If man can adapt at a multiple of 10, but technology is changing at a multiple of 20, we get overloaded. Kind of like those of you who have children or grandchildren, small children. What happens when they get, I think the term is overstimulated, okay? They freak out. They lose it. They can't take it because they're overstimulated. There's too much going on for their small minds to handle. That's kind of what's happening with us. There's too much going on. There's too much change for our small minds to handle. And just not in this country, and just not in the West, but in all kinds of places. Case in point, where is arguably, for many years, one of the most volatile places in the world? Lebanon, okay? Those poor people, I mean, their government is almost worthless. They have a mixture of all kinds of different religions. In fact, they're the only Middle Eastern country that has a substantial Christian population. They've got Shiite Muslims, Shia? I can't think of the other one. There's two types of Muslims in Lebanon, and then there's Christians, and they share the parliament. They share the country, and they share power. But Hezbollah kind of runs the roost because they've got more weapons than the army does, okay? And they're at war with Israel. Most Lebanese don't want this, but it doesn't matter because they don't have the guns, okay? And there's all but full-scale war going on between, and I'll say Israel and Hezbollah because it's not truly Israel and Lebanon. The Lebanese army is not involved in this war. It's just the Hezbollah militia that's funded by Iran, okay? In the south of Lebanon, it's a big deal, but not in the north, okay? In fact, there's all kinds of things going on in the north that are just business as usual. There's a mountain resort about 15 miles from the border of Israel, okay, where the war just isn't happening, okay? The Middle East is a hot place in the summertime, but in the mountains at elevation, it's cooler, okay? I'm reading this article where they had, there's a swimming pool, young people ordering bottle service, puffing on cigars, listening to music, drinking cocktails at tables. I mean, this is an exclusive place. Costs $100 just to get into a table. Then you order drinks and food, okay? But the people do this as an escape. They're adapting. They're doing what they can because they interviewed one lady. Her name was Luna Karame. She's 26, and she works in the fashion industry in Paris, and she comes home to Lebanon for the summer. And she says, in this country, you have to hold on to happiness. And you think to yourself, well, why would you even, if you spend half your time in Paris, why would you even come back to Lebanon? Because once upon a time, Beirut was called the Paris of the Middle East, okay? It's got its French roots, used to be a French colony. People still speak French there. They still have ties with France. There's daily flights from Beirut to Paris. But that's their home. That's where they live. That's where their family is. That's what they know. In fact, Lebanon is actually living two realities. In the south, they've had the heaviest fighting there that they've had in 2 decades. More than 500 people were recently killed. Most of them were Hezbollah fighters, according to Lebanon's health ministry. But other Lebanese are doing their best just to live life as normal. And that includes escaping the heat of the desert to go up into the mountains and take it easy. It's always been this, says Carla Salam. She's a 60-year-old fashion shop owner from Beirut, and she's visiting the family chalet in the mountain town of Ferrara for the summer. This is resilience pushed to the extreme, she says. Now, the scene in the Middle East, hey, because of Gaza, Hezbollah says we'll be fighting Israel until they pull out of Gaza. Israel says, well, we're not going to pull out of Gaza until we get our hostages back. And they're not going to release the hostages, so they're all at a stalemate, okay? Another guy, Hafez Mustafa, he's a 47-year-old farmer. He had a farm 2 miles from the border. Well, he moved north because they blew up his house and killed his cows. There's nothing left. So what do? You move El Norte, and you live where you can, okay? Now, the people of Lebanon have long had a divided nation. 5 million people live there. That's it. But there's a plethora of faiths and sects, and they swerve from one violent conflict and political crisis to the next, stretching back to the 15-year civil war between 1970 and the middle of the 1980s, okay? So before 1970, the early 1970s, Lebanon was pretty much a safe place. Now, for years, though, the country has been controlled by a feeble caretaker government that struggles to provide even basic services like electricity. Much less unifying a population. They can't. In fact, the main problem remains the fact there's no strong central government here in Lebanon. That's according to Christian Taudel. He's the director of the history department at St. Joseph University in Beirut. So in other words, the government really isn't in charge. Now, since the early 80s when Hezbollah was originated, and they did that to resist Israeli occupation of Lebanon, okay? They're the country's best armed force. They have more guns and ammunition, a bigger army than the army itself, okay? Now, Hezbollah is a legal party. They say, why don't they just boot them? Well, they're a legal party. Lebanon is basically, according to their constitution, a free country. And there's a lot of people there who elected Hezbollah. And they just have more money because Iran gives them money. Okay. A lot of people in Lebanon can't stand Iran because they think they've ruined their country. Now, in the Shia regions, that's according to Mr. Towdle, the guy from St. Joseph University, he says the majority think that the only the state can protect them. The only state that can protect them is Hezbollah. And for them, Lebanon is a failed state. The only thing they have is Hezbollah. That's the Shia people, okay? Now, in other areas, Hezbollah is seen as a private militia that's dedicated to enter a war that Lebanon doesn't even want. In fact, some people think the country is a country of its own in the south with Hezbollah. Now, this is according to a guy named Nadim Mentora. He's 34. He's an entrepreneur planning to open a hi-fi listening bar in Beirut. And he's discussing this over pizza. Now, they're at a fair. Families ate food as nannies watched children jump around in a bouncy castle. Teenage girls touched up their makeup. Boys smoked cigarettes. A woman carried a cockapoo in her arms. That's what goes on in Lebanon when the bombs aren't falling. I mention this because, again, people tend to adapt. And just because there's a war going on, I mean, there's been war going on in Lebanon since the early 70s. That's 50 years ago, okay? So unless you're an old man, that's all you know is war. And when you're tired of it, you move away from it. Or you do the best you can to move away from it. A lot of Palestinians live in Lebanon. They go to Beirut, okay, because, I mean, they're like anybody else. And they open up motorcycle fix-it shops and things like that. In other words, they do what they have to do, okay? That's in the south. Now, in the north, not so much. It's pretty much business as usual. Now, a lot of people think that if this war escalates and Hezbollah continues to bomb Israel and Israel continues to bomb the south of Lebanon, that this mess is going to move to the north. Now, what they'll do then, it's hard to say. But for right now, in the central and north of Lebanon, people have adapted. They're trying their best just to live life as best they can. Just being one of the adaptable human beings. But in America, it's the same way. And for many, many years, the template used to make money, to be successful, to have a career, you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a degree, maybe a bachelor's, maybe a master's, and then you go out into the world and you make your mark. Then tuition started to skyrocket. Then the university stopped teaching what needed to be taught. And you had a lot of people who came out of school with $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 in debt, and they couldn't get a job that paid more than $30,000 a year. And then they were stuck. Well, for many years, the old people said, "Oh, you big dummies, what are you going to college for? Just get you a job. Just get you a skilled trades job, okay? They pay more anyway, and we need skilled tradespeople. These young people don't want to work nowadays." Well, guess what the Gen Zers are doing in record amounts? They're skipping college. They're taking blue-collar jobs, and they're launching trade businesses. In fact, CNBC interviewed a bunch of Gen Zers, and they basically are all saying the same thing. Look, this is one of the smartest decisions I ever made. And they're doing things like becoming auto technicians, okay? In fact, there's a story of a lady named Chris Morleon. She's a 27-year-old service technician at Lucid Motors. And she said this job helped her save enough money to buy her first house. Okay, she didn't go to college. She went to a little bit of trade school. They taught her on the job. She knows how to fix electric cars. And last year she made almost $100,000 a year. Gen Zers, a lot of people knock them. I don't. In fact, I've said this countless times, and I'll say it countless times more. Anybody who knocks the younger generation doesn't know what they're talking about. They're ridiculous. They're just an old doofus. Because my only problem, like I've said, my only problem with the younger generation is I'm not part of it. Because there's so many of them out there who are just so smart and they're hardworking and they know what they need to do. And a lot of these young people are just getting jobs, blue collar jobs, just like their parents or grandparents had. Okay. Now this young lady, Chris Morleon, she was 16 years old and she just got into an auto shop class at school. She went to high school in Phoenix. Okay. She thought it'd be fun. And she found out it was really fun. In fact, she instantly fell in with working on cars. She thought it was great. She graduated high school, and everyone said, you need to go to college. She said, I don't want to go to college. College is stupid. I'm going to become an auto technician. and they said, what? You're a girl. You can't be an auto technician. And she said, look, I don't want to spend another 4 years sitting behind a desk and learning. I knew what I wanted. I knew I wanted to work on cars, and I didn't need a bachelor's degree to do that. So she enrolled in a 1-year vocational school program at the Universal Technical Institute in Avon, Arizona. I had a buddy who went there for motorcycle class, okay? She received an associate's occupation studies degree in automotive technologies. Now, the degree cost $30,000, okay, which isn't cheap. But she got a $15,000 scholarship to attend the program, okay? So she actually spent $18,000 to become a certified technician. Now, that's less than a third of the cost of getting the average bachelor's degree, okay? She graduated in 2017 and immediately landed a job as a service assistant at Tesla, which they came to the school and they recruited people. She didn't have to go to them. They came to her. And within a year, she was promoted to a service technician. And she worked at Tesla for 4 years, and in 2021, decided to work for Lucid Motors as a service technician, another electric car company. She continues to work for them today. She earns $78,000 a year. $78,000 working on cars. Okay? Now, the average technician doesn't earn that, but she's not your average technician. She's a climber, and she's done this for quite some time now. Average automotive technician, they still earn $57,000 a year, which isn't horrible. In fact, the more experienced technicians can earn over $100,000 a year. And that's according to ZipRecruiter, okay? And Morion expects to hit that six-figure mark by the time she hits 30. Working in a skilled trade has helped her hit financial milestones a lot sooner than her peers. She bought her first car and her first house by the time she was 24. 24! She bought her house and her car because she was working at a skilled trades job. Now, high housing costs and mortgage rates continue to push home ownership to the brink, but not if you have a skilled trade. Because again, it's just like anything else. If things cost more, but you earn more, it's not an issue. If you earn like you earned 10 years ago, then it's an issue. And this is a young lady, okay? And, once upon a time, young ladies didn't work on cars. Well, you know what? Cars aren't like they used to be. You've got to know computers. You've got to know a lot of technical stuff to be able to work on a car. This lady learned it in the school, and she's doing what she needs to do. Chase Gallagher, he's 23. He's a CEO of CMG Landscaping in Pennsylvania. His business broke $1 million in annual revenue last year. The kid's 23. Young man is 23. He started off mowing neighbors' lawns when he was 12 at $35 a pop. Within 4 years, that after-school side hustle was netting him more than $50,000 a year. Yeah. So here's a kid that's 16 years old making $50,000 a year cutting the neighbor's grass. Okay. Now, the return on an investment of a college degree seems smaller and smaller as Gallagher approached high school graduation. He said, look, I would have had to pay for my education and lose 4 revenue-producing years. I didn't see the benefit of spending money if I could build my business and wealth instead. So not only did he say, look, I don't want to spend the money on college. He said, but if I'm going to college, I'm not earning money. And he says, that's baloney. In 2018, he hired his first regular employees and rented a commercial house space near his parents' house for $300 a month to store his tools and pickup trucks. Yeah, plural, trucks, okay? He moved out of his parents' house when he was 19. After renting an apartment for a year, bought his first house with earnings from his landscape company. The kid bought a house at 20. Okay? Now Gallagher's landscape business has 9 employees and does everything from stormwater management to drainage work to pavers and lightings. How much does Gallagher make a year? He said, after deducting businesses and taxes, et cetera, he said, I take home about $250,000 a year. Not bad for a kid who cut grass. Okay. Is cutting grass a skilled trade? Yeah, it kind of is. And I say that because anybody can cut grass. But if you've seen some of these guys cutting grass in your neighborhoods, in fact, in my neighborhood and probably in yours, most people don't cut their own grass. They hire a service to do it. And these guys pull up in trucks with these ride-along mowers, and they can cut it. It takes me close to an hour to cut my yard. I have a unique yard, okay? It's got lots of hills and undulations, and you really can't cut it with a walk-behind power mower, the big type, or a rider, okay? It takes me an hour. These guys get it done in about 10 minutes, okay? And they charge $35, but for 10 minutes work. And normally what they do is they park the truck in one area, and they got like 6 lawns that they cut. So, and they got 4 guys. So they're in and out in a half an hour, okay? And they've probably made, I don't know, $300. It's amazing. It's amazing. In that case, yes, it is a skilled trade. Cutting grass is easy. Cutting grass at a profit is not easy, okay? I had a customer in the paper business where I used to work, and this guy made paper, okay? And he made paper for years. He said, paper is easy to make. Paper is one of the easiest things in the world to make. But where the challenge is you've got to make paper fast enough to keep it in the black. Same thing with cutting grass. Cutting grass is not a big deal. Most people cut grass for leisure. But to make money at it, it takes a special skill, okay? And more young people are doing this. In fact, there's another guy. His name is Ryan Daniels. He started working when he was 16 years old, and he owns a power washing company. Power washes, okay? Everybody power washes, but this guy bought a power washer on Facebook Marketplace for $200, recruited one of his friends to drive around their neighborhood together, charged people $100 an hour to install and clean debris off their hurricane shutters, I should say. It was a fun summer, but then he realized that he made a ton of money. Last year, in 2023, RHI Pressure Washing had about $250,000 in revenue, okay? Daniel's take-home pay after expenses is $79,000, okay? This is a 17-year-old kid, all right? That was some years ago, okay? He's got about $400,000 in the bank already. These people adapted, okay? They looked at things, they saw the way everybody else did it, and they decided to do things just a bit differently, okay? And these are all the Gen Zers. These are the lazy kids who do nothing but sit around and play video games, okay? Okay, they're not lazy. They're very smart, and they're doing just fine. And if you rely on listening to what the old men at McDonald's say, or what you see on the news, or what you read in the statistics about how young people are this, and young people are just all fat dopes that the Army doesn't even want them, okay? There's always that 20% who are the drivers, the movers, the shakers, the captains of industry. I don't care what generation it is. It's always been that way. I don't care how old you are, but it's always been that way for your generation. I mean, I can't tell you how many slugs I knew growing up, and they never really amounted to much. But I also know of a lot of people who really hit the jackpot, okay? And that's the way it is. You get the slugs, you get the also-rans, and then you get the superstars. That's every generation, okay? And people adapt. When I was a kid, if somebody wanted to I'm going to have a power washing business, okay? Well, okay, great. I guess you're too stupid to go to college, okay? You wouldn't have $400,000 in the bank. In fact, most people, when they hit 65 and have good careers, don't have $400,000 in the bank, okay? Now, Mr. Daniels works about 35 hours a week right now, but he's planning to reduce his hours for the next few years and work part-time until he feels ready for full retirement. The guy's he's 30, okay? But he says, I much prefer physical exhaustion of manual labor over mental hours of working all day long on a computer. I think people are realizing that they can be happy and successful on either path, whatever makes them happy. And that's just it. It's adaptability. Find a product or service that's needed, provide that product or service, and you'll make yourself a bunch of dough. The adaptable human being. That's me and you and a ton of Gen Zers. Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your emails. I will correspond with you. Okay? Thank you for listening. I appreciate it, dear listeners. That's it. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.